TIFU by trying to impress my crush and accidentally ruining my own life, so let me set the scene. I, 21M, have a massive crush on this girl, Emily, 20F, who I met a few months ago through a mutual friend. We hit it off instantly, and after a few weeks of texting, I thought things were going well. She seemed to like me too, at least, that's what I convinced myself. Now, I'm not the most suave or confident guy when it comes to women, but I do okay for myself. That said, I was completely out of my league with Emily. She's one of those effortlessly cool, funny, and intelligent people who seem to shine in every room they walk into. I'm more of the awkward, makes terrible jokes, but tries really hard type. I decided early on that I would need to step up my game to keep up with her. You know, do something that would really blow her away, make her think, wow, this guy is amazing. My plan? To cook her a homemade dinner. Now, I know what you're thinking, cooking a meal? How could that possibly go wrong? Well, let me tell you, it could go horribly wrong, and it did. Emily had mentioned once that she loved Italian food, specifically homemade lasagna. So, I thought to myself, how hard can it be to make lasagna? It's just layers of noodles, sauce, cheese, and some meat, right? I had zero cooking experience outside of the microwave and cereal, but I was determined to pull this off. I spent days watching cooking tutorials, reading recipes, and shopping for ingredients. I wasn't just going to throw some random lasagna together, I was going to make the perfect lasagna. I took the task seriously. I even bought a fancy apron that said, "I'm kind of a big deal," because I thought it would make me look charmingly goofy. The night of the dinner, everything started off well enough. I invited Emily over, and she was all smiles when she saw me in my apron. I told her, "Tonight, I'm making you the best lasagna you've ever had." She seemed impressed. At least, I thought she was. She kept complimenting me on the effort and said she was excited for the food, but I could see a little hesitation in her eyes. She probably thought I was some kind of idiot who would burn the place down trying to cook. At first, the lasagna was coming together perfectly. I layered everything meticulously, no shortcuts here. I cooked the noodles just right, mixed up the sauce with fresh tomatoes, basil, and garlic, browned the meat until it was perfect. The kitchen smelled amazing, and I felt a surge of pride. I was about to impress the hell out of Emily. But then, disaster struck. You see, my oven is ancient. I've been meaning to get it checked out, but I kept procrastinating. So, I popped the lasagna in, set the timer, and walked away. About 10 minutes into the bake time, I noticed a strange smell, something burning. I thought, no way, I'm doing everything by the book. How could this go wrong? I checked the lasagna. It wasn't burnt yet, but the top was looking a little too crisp. I figured it needed a bit more time, so I put it back in the oven. Meanwhile, Emily was in the living room, chatting with me casually, and I tried to keep my cool, but the sense of panic was starting to creep in. I told her, just a few more minutes, we're almost there. Another 10 minutes passed, and the smell was getting stronger. At this point, I was starting to sweat. I opened the oven, and my heart sank. The lasagna was definitely burnt, like, beyond recognition burnt. The edges were blackened, and the sauce was starting to char in places. The noodles were sticking to the pan in an alarming way. But I couldn't give up. I had to salvage this. I quickly scooped out the worst parts of the lasagna and tried to cover up the burnt areas with fresh cheese. I slapped it back in the oven, hoping it would somehow come out better. Emily, completely oblivious to the disaster unfolding in the kitchen, was still chatting away in the living room. I could feel the weight of this moment pressing on me, knowing that my entire evening hung in the balance. After what felt like an eternity, the timer finally went off. I took the lasagna out and set it down on the table, trying to maintain some semblance of confidence. I placed a few slices on a plate and served them to Emily, hoping she wouldn't notice the charred edges. As I handed her the plate, I put on my best smile and said, "I hope you're hungry." Emily took a bite, and I watched her carefully. Her eyes widened slightly, and she chewed slowly. I could tell something was off. She swallowed and looked up at me. This is interesting. I wanted to die right then and there. Interesting? I repeated, trying to laugh it off. Yeah, I tried something new with the recipe. It's experimental. She smiled awkwardly and took another bite. Yeah, definitely different. I think you might have burned the edges a little. At that point, my heart sank to the floor. No, it's supposed to be like that. A little crispy. Adds texture. I laughed nervously. She gave me an awkward smile, clearly not convinced, and I could feel my confidence plummeting. The conversation started to stall. We both sat there, eating the most terrible lasagna I've ever created. It was quiet, and I could feel the mood shifting. Every bite she took felt like a reminder of how badly I had screwed up. But the real kicker came when Emily got up to use the bathroom. I decided to take the opportunity to check the oven again and see if there was any chance of saving the rest of the lasagna. As I opened the oven, the smell hit me like a freight train. There, sitting on the bottom of the oven, was a giant puddle of cheese and sauce that had oozed out of the pan and melted onto the heating element. The oven was now smoking, and I could hear a faint sizzling noise. I panicked. I opened the oven door all the way, and smoke billowed out into the kitchen. My immediate reaction was to try and turn the oven off, but I knocked over a bowl of salad that I'd made for the side, spilling dressing all over the counter. Emily came back into the kitchen just in time to see me flailing around, trying to manage a small fire and clean up a mess I'd made. "Are you okay?" she asked, looking genuinely concerned. I looked back at her, defeated, and said, "Yeah, I'm great. Just a minor kitchen mishap." She gave me a look that was equal parts sympathy and disbelief. I'm sure it was clear to her that this was more than a minor mishap. We ended up ordering takeout, and the night was, well, uncomfortable. Emily was kind and tried to act like nothing was wrong, but I knew I'd completely blown it. By the time she left, I was so embarrassed I couldn't even look her in the eye. The next few days were awkward. I tried texting her, but she was distant. She thanked me for the effort, but I could tell it wasn't the same anymore. Eventually, I got the "let's just be friends" speech. And that's how I went from feeling like a hero to a complete idiot in the span of a few hours. I'll never live down the great lasagna disaster, and I'll probably never cook for anyone again. So, if you're thinking of impressing someone with a homemade meal, maybe just go with pizza. Or, don't try to cook at all. Anyway, that's my TIFU. Don't be an idiot like me. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more great videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. By the way, I'm curious, when do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for your support. TIFU by accidentally getting my best friend fired, then being forced to spend the whole week covering for him. So, this happened a few weeks ago, and I'm still trying to figure out how everything spiraled so out of control. I've been friends with Kevin since we were kids, literally. We met in kindergarten and just clicked. We've been through everything together, high school, college, and even a few jobs. We've always had each other's backs, or at least, I thought we did. Kevin and I have always been pretty different when it comes to work. I'm the guy who's constantly over-prepared, follows the rules, and makes sure to double-check everything. Kevin, on the other hand, has always been the wing-it type. Not that he's lazy, far from it, but he has this uncanny ability to get away with cutting corners and still getting results. He's like the human embodiment of a don't ask, don't tell policy, and for the most part, it worked for him. We both ended up working at a marketing firm after college. I started out in a junior role, just trying to figure out how to make a name for myself in the industry. Kevin, on the other hand, was brought in as an account manager. He was great at talking to clients and making everything sound like $1,000,000, even when he wasn't sure how we were going to deliver on those promises. And that's where things started to get tricky. One of our big clients, a tech startup that was launching a new product, had some very high expectations. They hired our firm to handle their marketing campaign, and we were under a tight deadline. I was working late nights, checking and rechecking everything for the presentation, making sure our social media strategies, email campaigns, and ads were all perfect. Kevin was supposed to oversee everything and ensure the client was kept in the loop. Here's where I screwed up. Kevin wasn't really the best at keeping track of details. He had a tendency to let things slip through the cracks. I know he wasn't doing it maliciously, he just had a different approach to managing things. And instead of communicating that to me, I ended up thinking everything was fine. He'd give vague updates, like, yeah, I spoke to them, everything's good, and I'd trust him because, well, he was my best friend. We were a team, right? But the week before the big presentation, I started to notice some things. Kevin seemed to be acting a little strange. He was avoiding his usual meetings with the client, and every time I asked him for an update, he'd brush it off with some excuse about being too busy or waiting on something from the team. Meanwhile, I was drowning in work, doing my best to make sure the creative side of things was on point. Then, the night before the presentation, I got a call from the client. The conversation went something like this: Client, hey, we've been trying to get in touch with Kevin, and we haven't heard back from him in 2 days. Is everything okay? Me, yeah, everything's fine. He's just been tied up with other stuff, but we're all set for the presentation tomorrow. Client, that's the thing, we were expecting a draft of the ad copy and the final marketing plan by today, but we haven't seen anything. We've been checking in with Kevin, but he's not responding. Can you tell me what's going on? Panic hit me like a freight train. I tried to stall, coming up with excuses, but I knew I was in deep. I was on the verge of a meltdown, and the client could tell. Client, listen, if we don't get those drafts by tomorrow, we're going to have to reconsider the whole campaign. We can't afford to be this far behind. Is Kevin even working on this, or? I felt like I was suffocating. I wanted to throw Kevin under the bus, but that wasn't an option, he was my best friend, after all. So, I did the next best thing, I told the client I'd handle it. I promised I'd send over the drafts myself and that I'd fix everything. The next morning, I called Kevin multiple times, but he didn't answer. I was sweating bullets. I had no idea how to put together an entire marketing campaign on the fly, especially one that was supposed to impress a client that was already on edge. At this point, I started digging through Kevin's files. It wasn't ideal, but I had no choice. I found a bunch of half-finished documents, emails with vague notes, and a couple of presentations that looked like they were in the draft stage, but nothing that could actually be used. Kevin hadn't done nearly as much work as I thought. I spent the next several hours frantically trying to put together something that looked remotely like a real marketing plan. It was a nightmare. I wasn't sure if the campaign would work, if it would impress the client, or if I'd even be able to finish it in time. Every email I sent, every draft I submitted felt like I was just throwing spaghetti at the wall. The presentation that afternoon was a disaster. I'm pretty sure the client could tell I was scrambling. They didn't seem angry at first, but I could tell they were losing patience. When the meeting finally ended, they told me they needed to rethink their partnership. I walked out of that room feeling like I'd just been hit by a bus. I got back to the office and was hoping Kevin would show up to face the music, but he never came. Hours passed, and I got an email from HR. They told me they were concerned about Kevin's lack of communication and the delay in the project and that they were going to investigate the situation. It didn't take long for HR to figure out that Kevin had basically ghosted everyone, including the client, and that he hadn't delivered any of the work he was supposed to. A few days later, Kevin was fired. I felt like the biggest idiot. Kevin was my friend, and I'd just let him down by trusting him with something so important. The worst part was, I didn't know how to tell him that I'd essentially thrown him under the bus without actually doing it on purpose. He'd gone missing for days after the meeting, and when he finally reached out to me, I had to explain what happened. He was pissed. He felt like I'd let him down by not having his back. And to be honest, I didn't have a good response. I should have talked to him sooner about what was going wrong, but I didn't. I didn't want to hurt his feelings or make things awkward. Kevin's still my best friend, but things have been strained between us. He moved to another city for a new job, and I've been left to pick up the pieces. In hindsight, I know I should have been more proactive in getting involved earlier, but I was so focused on my own work that I ignored the obvious red flags. I'll never make that mistake again. TLDR, trusted my best friend at work, didn't keep track of his progress, and ended up getting him fired when the client figured out he hadn't done his job. Spent days covering for him and making a huge mess. TIFU by getting trapped in a mall parking garage and missing my own wedding, so let me set the scene. It's the day of my wedding. I've been planning this event for what feels like years, and it's finally happening. The flowers are perfect, the venue is beautiful, and my soon-to-be wife is anxiously waiting for me at the altar. Everything is in place. My best man, Greg, and I are getting ready to leave for the church. We're running a little behind, nothing unusual for me, I'm always pushing it last minute. I'm putting on my suit, doing last-minute checks, and Greg is downstairs grabbing the car keys. The plan was simple, Greg would drive, I would just sit back, enjoy the ride, and try to calm my nerves. We're both dressed to the nines, and the plan is to leave the house by 2:30 p.m. at the latest, so we can arrive before the ceremony starts at 3 p.m. It's a 20-minute drive, tops. Simple, right? Wrong. As soon as we leave the house, Greg gets this idea to stop by the mall to pick up a last-minute wedding gift for my bride. He insists it'll only take 5 minutes, and it'll be a quick detour. I'm hesitant, but I agree because, hey, what's 5 minutes, right? We drive to the mall. It's not far, about a 10-minute drive, but there's always the risk of the parking lot being packed on weekends, especially on a Saturday afternoon. And, of course, we find the only spot in the entire parking garage, on the farthest end of the lot, in the absolute last row. At this point, it's about 2:45 p.m. The ceremony starts at 3 o'clock, and I'm starting to feel the stress building up, but Greg is nonchalant. We'll be in and out in no time, he says. It'll be fine. We grab the gift, which takes longer than anticipated because the store we're in has a long line, and then Greg gets distracted by a tech store for a couple of minutes. It's already 3:10 p.m. when we head back to the car. I'm starting to get really agitated because we're already running late, and I'm imagining my bride waiting at the altar, looking at the clock, wondering where I am. Now, here's where things get interesting. We get to the parking garage, and when we reach the elevator, it's out of order. No big deal, right? We'll just take the stairs. The only problem is that we're on the top floor, and the stairwell is located in the absolute farthest corner of the garage. We begin walking to the stairwell, and as we make our way down, we see a sign that says stairwell under maintenance. At this point, I'm losing my patience. Greg tries to calm me down, but I can tell he's getting a little stressed, too. We decide to go back to the elevator. I press the button. Nothing happens. The elevator still isn't working. By this point, it's almost 3:20 p.m. We're running out of options. Greg suggests we drive down to the lower level of the garage and take the other elevator. But when we get in the car, I realize that the exit ramp is blocked. There's a security vehicle sitting right in front of the ramp, preventing anyone from leaving. I ask Greg to go talk to the guard, but the security guard is nowhere to be found. So we drive around the garage, hoping to find a way out, but there's no other exit. The clock is ticking, and I'm starting to panic. At this point, it feels like we're stuck in some kind of nightmare where every attempt to leave just leads to another dead end. It's like a maze. We circle around, trying to find the exit, but the more we drive around, the more lost we become. Then, I realize something. The wedding ceremony has already started. I glance at my phone, it's 3:40 p.m. now. I'm going to miss it. I'm officially going to be the guy who got stuck in a parking garage on the day of his wedding. I'm not sure whether to laugh or cry. Greg, being the absolute legend he is, keeps trying to find an exit, but by now, every solution we come up with seems to take us farther away from the door. Finally, after what feels like an eternity, Greg manages to get us to the exit, but of course, there's one more hurdle. We have to get out of the parking lot, which has this incredibly complicated system. We've both been to the mall dozens of times, but I guess we never noticed the maze-like exit system. We end up waiting at the gate while it tries to process our ticket. The machine spits it out like it doesn't recognize the code, and I have no idea what's going on. At this point, I'm panicking. I'm imagining the entire wedding party at the church, waiting for me. Greg eventually manages to get the gate to open. But we're now 45 minutes behind schedule. My phone is blowing up with calls and messages from my mom, the wedding planner, and a few of my groomsmen asking where I am. I'm not even sure how to explain this. I feel like a complete idiot. We finally make it to the church, but when we walk in, the ceremony is in full swing. My bride is already at the altar, and the priest is halfway through the vows. I'm in a full-on panic mode. I know I've missed part of the ceremony, but I don't know what else to do. I pull my best man aside and apologize profusely. He says there's no time to dwell on it, we need to focus on salvaging what we can of the day. Somehow, we get through the rest of the ceremony, but I can tell my bride is visibly upset. I try to apologize to her later, but she's too mad. Not just at me for being late, but because I was so careless and didn't take things seriously enough. We end up having a very tense reception, and even though everyone was still nice to us, I know I've made a major mistake. In the end, we got married, but it's not the fairy tale I envisioned. I've never been so embarrassed in my life. Greg, who I thought would be my savior, was just as clueless as I was. If you ever plan on getting married, take my advice, avoid malls, parking garages, and any unnecessary detours. Just go straight to the venue. Trust me, your wedding day will thank you. TIFU by accidentally sending my nude photos to my entire family. So, here's the deal. I'm a 23-year-old woman and up until last week, I thought I had a pretty solid grip on the whole technology thing. I mean, I've been using smartphones, social media, and all the apps since I was in high school. I knew how to take a selfie, send a snap, post an Instagram story, and I definitely knew how to send a private photo. Or so I thought. This is my story of how everything came crashing down, all because of one tiny mistake on my phone. It all started last Saturday night. I had just gotten out of a relationship with a guy who, while we were together, had shared some very personal, intimate moments. We decided to end things amicably, but that didn't stop me from feeling down. A few drinks were involved, and I found myself scrolling through my phone, looking at old photos of us. I had just gotten a new phone, so I was transferring some photos over from my old one when I stumbled upon an old folder full of pictures that I really should have deleted months ago. You know the ones, those explicit photos you regret sending but never quite get rid of, thinking that no one will ever see them again. In a mix of emotions, I found myself in the mood to text my best friend Sarah. We've been close since high school and can talk about literally anything. I'd been feeling vulnerable, and we'd always had a thing where we would vent to each other after breakups or bad days. So, in a moment of weakness, I decided to send her a photo I had taken months ago, a somewhat racy selfie from one of those let's have some fun moments when you're feeling confident. I wasn't thinking too much about it, but I didn't want to come off as completely insane, so I added a text, just wanted to share this with you, no judgment, please. I clicked on her name in my messages and hit send without much thought. But here's where everything went horribly, horribly wrong. In my tipsy state, I had somehow, I have no idea how this happened, clicked the wrong contact. Instead of sending the photo to Sarah, I had sent it to the wrong group chat. Now, I'm sure you're wondering, what group chat could possibly be the one where this mistake would lead to a complete disaster? Well, let me tell you. It was the family group chat. Yep, my entire family. The group includes my parents, my older brother, my aunt, my cousin, and even my grandma. I don't know how I managed to do it, but the instant I realized what I'd done, a sinking feeling hit me. I immediately went into panic mode. You see, my family isn't exactly what you would call open about stuff like this. We don't talk about sex, relationships, or anything remotely personal like that. In fact, the most embarrassing thing that has ever happened in this family group chat was my dad accidentally sending a picture of a poorly cooked steak he had made one night. So, you can imagine how out of place my nude photo was. The moment the photo sent, the phone started blowing up with notifications. My screen was filled with texts popping up faster than I could read them. "Who's this?" my brother texted, followed by a crying laughing emoji. "Oh my God, is that you?" my aunt replied, followed by a shocked emoji. "I don't think that's meant for this chat," my cousin said, and then, WTF? My dad's message was simply? And then, my grandma sent a message that read, "Is this a new fashion trend?" followed by 3 exclamation points. I wanted to die right then and there. I immediately tried to delete the message from the chat. But as anyone who's ever used a group chat knows, once it's out there, it's out there. I can only assume that everyone saw it. The photo was just sitting there like an eternal reminder of my huge mistake. I frantically typed out a message to try and smooth things over. "Sorry, wrong chat. That was meant for a friend." I quickly sent it. But no one replied to that. Instead, the group chat just erupted. Is that a thing people do? Like, send naked pictures to people by accident? My brother asked. Please tell me this isn't a family tradition, my aunt joked, though I could sense some genuine awkwardness. I'm dying. I can't stop laughing, my cousin wrote. Then, there was a long pause, until my grandma's message came in. I'm still waiting for an explanation, young lady. No more weird fashion trends like this, please. I could have crawled into a hole and stayed there forever. But my mom, she was the worst of all. You see, my mom has this thing where she's very protective. So when she finally joined the chat, she had no mercy. You will never send those types of pictures again, do you hear me? This is unacceptable behavior in this family. What were you thinking? And that was it. I tried to explain myself, saying that it was an accident, but it didn't matter. My mom didn't even respond to me. She just called me, and the second I answered, she started with a rant. I won't lie, I tuned out most of it because I was just so mortified. It was like hearing someone lecture me while my soul was slowly leaving my body. After what felt like hours of awkwardness and endless texts from family members, the group chat finally quieted down. But I couldn't escape the feeling that I had just ruined every single family gathering for the foreseeable future. The awkward glances, the side eye, the knowing chuckles, they would never let me live this down. The next day, my mom asked me if I had learned my lesson and reminded me to be more careful with my phone. My dad, on the other hand, didn't bring it up, but I could tell he was trying his best not to laugh every time he saw me. And Sarah? She got the message later that night and, well, let's just say she found it all hilarious. She spent the next hour sending me memes about how I'd just accidentally joined the nudes sent to the wrong person club. She called it a rite of passage. As if that helped. So, yeah, that's the story of how I accidentally sent a nude to my entire family. Moral of the story, if you're going to send something private, double-check the recipient. And if you think it's just your best friend you're texting, well, you better hope it's actually your best friend and not your entire family. TIFU by accidentally getting my best friend's dog stolen, and it's all because of a misunderstanding with a dog adoption form. So, about 6 months ago, my best friend, Jenna, adopted a dog from a local shelter. She'd been talking about getting a dog for years, and after some serious research, she decided to go with a medium-sized rescue pup named Benny. Benny was an adorable, scruffy little terrier mix, with shaggy fur and big brown eyes that made everyone who met him immediately fall in love. Jenna and Benny were inseparable. The dog had a huge personality and, being the social media savvy person she is, she posted about him all the time. Benny became quite the little star on her Instagram, and I started to really bond with him too. One Friday evening, Jenna asked me to take care of Benny for the weekend while she went on a little trip to visit her parents. It wasn't unusual, I'd watched Benny before without any issues. I'd even gone on walks with him and given him treats. But this time was different. This time, I made a rookie mistake that would turn into one of the most chaotic weekends of my life. When Jenna left, she gave me a list of instructions as usual. Feed him twice a day, take him for walks, and make sure he doesn't get into the trash. She also mentioned something about a dog adoption event that was coming up at the shelter, where Benny was originally adopted from. Apparently, there was going to be some kind of homecoming event to celebrate Benny's successful adoption. She'd volunteered to help at the event, but since she wouldn't be there, she asked if I could bring Benny along. This is where I messed up. In the back of my mind, I remembered seeing something online about the shelter doing checkups and paperwork for all dogs that were adopted from them. I assumed that because Jenna had adopted Benny there, she would have filled out all the necessary paperwork already. I was wrong. The event was in a big open park near the shelter, and when I arrived with Benny in tow, there were a few other people with their dogs, chatting with the shelter staff and volunteers. I saw a familiar face in the crowd, a lady who worked at the shelter, and I waved her over. She recognized Benny immediately and seemed excited to see him again. I told her that I was here for the event and was happy to bring Benny along. She smiled and asked me for the adoption paperwork to confirm Benny's adoption. Now, in hindsight, this should have been a huge red flag, but I was so distracted by the event and the people there that I didn't give it much thought. I shrugged and said, "Oh, Jenna didn't tell me about any paperwork. She's out of town, but I'm just here to help." The volunteer then went on to explain that the shelter was running an annual check-in for all dogs they had adopted out, to make sure the pets were doing well in their new homes. I thought that sounded perfectly reasonable and agreed to help out. She handed me a clipboard with a form, which I filled out without really thinking. At this point, I was just eager to get Benny mingling with the other dogs and see the other people there. When I handed the clipboard back, the volunteer smiled again and said, "Thank you so much. Benny's such a sweet boy. We'll make sure everything is in order." I assumed she meant that they'd send the paperwork back to Jenna, or that it would be part of the general check-in process. I petted Benny, chatted with a few more people, and then spent a lovely afternoon at the event. Fast forward to Sunday afternoon, and Jenna was back from her trip. She picked up Benny from my place, and I thought everything was fine. We hung out for a bit, and I briefly mentioned the event, telling her about how I'd brought Benny and filled out the paperwork. Jenna didn't seem too pleased. She raised an eyebrow and asked, "Wait, did you fill out the form with Benny's information?" I confirmed, and she immediately started looking a bit worried. "Why did you do that?" she asked, her tone changing. I thought she was just worried I'd messed up the form, but she was getting a little panicked now. "Well, it was a check-in form," I explained. "I thought you'd mentioned it. I thought it was part of some standard process the shelter does." She shook her head. No. That wasn't the check-in form. That was a transfer of ownership form." I stared at her, completely confused. "What do you mean, transfer of ownership?" Jenna pulled out her phone, opened up an email from the shelter, and showed me the message. It read something like this, "Dear Ms. Jenna, due to a misunderstanding regarding your dog Benny's adoption paperwork, we regret to inform you that your dog Benny has been legally transferred to another family. We apologize for the inconvenience caused, but this is the result of incomplete documentation when the dog was adopted. Please contact us immediately for further information." I was dumbfounded. I had accidentally filled out a form that transferred Benny's ownership to someone else. And no one told me? I felt like I was in some weird nightmare. I immediately called the shelter, explaining the situation and asking how they could have done this. After a tense 15-minute conversation, it became clear that they hadn't intended to send Benny to anyone else, it was just a clerical error. The volunteer I had spoken to had mistaken my form for an official adoption transfer, and because I didn't have authorization from Jenna, who was out of town, the shelter assumed I was part of some new adoption process. To make matters worse, the family who had been sent Benny was already on their way home with him. The shelter assured me they would be able to handle it and get Benny back, but they were legally obligated to give the dog to the family until the paperwork could be sorted out. It took over 48 hours before we could finally get Benny back. He'd been with this other family for a weekend, during which they had already grown attached to him. When the shelter arrived to explain the mix-up and take Benny back, the new family was understandably upset. They had just fallen in love with him, and they were heartbroken. It was a scene straight out of a movie. Benny was understandably confused, as he was bounced between so many strangers. The entire thing was a mess. By the time I finally got Benny back into my arms, I swore I would never go near any adoption forms ever again. Jenna and I agreed that I'd never take Benny to a shelter event on my own again, and I promised to never, ever handle adoption paperwork for any reason. I also made sure to send a huge apology to the family that almost adopted him, along with a generous gift card for their troubles. Jenna and I still joke about it, but I'm never going to live this one down. My accidental mistake almost got Benny stolen, and I'll forever be the person who made the whole thing a mess. TLDR, took care of my best friend's dog Benny while she was away, filled out the wrong adoption paperwork at a shelter event, and accidentally got him adopted by another family for a weekend. TIFU by trying to impress my date and ending up with a broken nose, an ambulance ride, and a very confused ER doctor. So, this happened last weekend. I, 28M, met this girl, 26F, on a dating app about a month ago. We hit it off pretty well, and after a few weeks of texting, we decided to meet in person. We agreed to go out to dinner at this cool little bistro downtown, and I was excited. I mean, we had really great conversations, and I thought there was potential for something special. The night of the date, I spent a solid hour picking out my outfit. I didn't want to overdo it, but I also wanted to look good. I settled on a nice button-up shirt, some jeans, and a casual jacket. I wanted to look effortlessly cool, nothing too flashy but just enough to show that I cared. When I got to the restaurant, I was feeling good about myself. I had even spent some extra time on my hair, which I never do, but I figured it might make a difference. Anyway, I showed up a little early because I like to be punctual, and I grabbed a seat at the bar to grab a drink while I waited. I texted her to let her know I was there. She showed up shortly after, looking even more amazing than her pictures. She had this cute, confident smile, and I was immediately put at ease. We sat down at our table, and the conversation flowed easily. She was funny, intelligent, and seemed to genuinely be enjoying herself. At least, I thought she was. Then, about halfway through dinner, I started to feel like I needed to show off a little. You know, like subtly demonstrate my skills and coolness to impress her. The moment of opportunity came when she mentioned she liked rock climbing. I don't rock climb, but I have a friend who's really into it, and I've gone a few times. It's a stretch, but I thought I could make myself sound pretty experienced. I leaned in with a confident grin and said, "Oh, I'm pretty into rock climbing too. In fact, I've done some pretty intense climbs." She raised an eyebrow and looked impressed, which gave me the boost I needed to keep going. I wasn't exactly lying, I had gone indoor rock climbing a few times at a gym with my buddy, but that's a far cry from the intense climbs I was describing. I started talking about the hardest routes I had conquered, how I'd scaled walls that were almost vertical, and how I once got a high five from a pro climber after completing an insane wall. She was hooked. She kept asking me questions about the techniques and the gear and all that. My ego was swelling with every word that came out of my mouth. The more I spoke, the more she seemed impressed. I felt like I was really winning here. Then came the fateful moment. I made a joke about how I was such an expert that I could probably climb anything, even a tree. I said, laughing a little at my own bravado. The thing is, I wasn't just talking. My inner idiot took over, and I decided to prove it. There was a large potted plant near the entrance of the restaurant, and it had a small tree in it. I could see it out of the corner of my eye, and suddenly, an idea hit me. You know what? I said, I'm gonna climb that tree right now. Watch this. I stood up, feeling a rush of adrenaline as if I were about to do something epic. Don't worry, I added, it's just a small tree. It'll be easy. She looked at me, a mixture of confusion and amusement in her eyes. Are you sure that's a good idea? I was already halfway to the plant before she could finish the sentence. My brain was firing on all cylinders, thinking this was a totally normal and even cool thing to do. I had just told her I could climb walls, so what was the harm in climbing a tree? I approached the tree, grabbed a branch, and swung one leg up to hoist myself over it. I made it about halfway up before my foot slipped, and suddenly I was falling forward with absolutely no grace. The world seemed to move in slow motion as I flailed wildly, trying to regain balance. Before I knew it, I crashed into the pot at the base of the tree, and the whole thing toppled over. There was a loud thud as the pot hit the floor, and soil went flying everywhere. I didn't even have time to process what had happened before I slammed into the ground face first. I lay there for a moment, stunned, trying to collect myself. I could feel the embarrassment flooding through my body, but it wasn't until I touched my face that I realized something was wrong. My nose was throbbing. It wasn't just a little pain, it was sharp, intense, and my face felt weird. I slowly sat up, realizing the extent of my disaster. I could see my date standing there, mouth agape, eyes wide. Are you okay? She asked, clearly trying to process what had just happened. I didn't respond immediately because my nose was bleeding, and I was pretty sure I'd broken it. I had never felt pain quite like that before. At that moment, I just wanted to disappear. I had tried so hard to be impressive, and now I was just a guy lying on the floor covered in dirt with a nose that looked like it belonged on someone else's face. I think I need help, I muttered. She looked around in panic and ran to get the restaurant staff. Within minutes, I was being helped to my feet by 2 waiters, and someone had already called an ambulance. I was still in a daze, trying to process that my attempt to look cool had ended with me in a full-blown disaster. The ambulance ride was surreal. I was still bleeding, and I could feel the swelling in my nose. The paramedic kept asking me questions, but I could barely focus on them because I was so embarrassed. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the moment I fell, and it haunted me. When we got to the ER, they immediately took me in, cleaned up my nose, and did an X-ray. The verdict? A broken nose and a mild concussion. They said I was lucky I hadn't caused more serious damage. As for the date? Well, she stuck around long enough to make sure I was okay. We talked a little in the ER, but honestly, the magic was gone. I could barely look her in the eye, and I think she was just as uncomfortable as I was. In the end, she left with a promise to check on me, but we both knew it wasn't going to work out. So yeah, I learned the hard way that sometimes trying too hard to impress someone can backfire spectacularly. My date didn't end with romance or laughter, it ended with an ambulance ride and a bruised ego. But hey, at least I'll always remember the time I tried to climb a tree in a restaurant and ended up in the ER. Lesson learned. Don't try to climb trees to impress people. Just don't. TIFU, by trying to impress my new girlfriend with a fancy dinner and ending up in the ER with a broken nose. It all started about 2 weeks ago. I, 27M, had recently started dating a girl, Emily, 25F. We had met at a mutual friend's party, and after a few casual hangouts, things started heating up. She was absolutely gorgeous, smart, funny, and, here's the kicker, into food. Like, really into food. I've always considered myself a decent cook, so I thought, hey, what better way to impress her than with a home-cooked, gourmet dinner? The plan was simple, a fancy 3-course meal, complete with wine pairings. I wanted to show her I was the kind of guy who could provide a romantic evening and a culinary experience. I was determined to go all out. I spent days researching recipes, trying to pick the perfect combination of dishes that would wow her. After scouring countless food blogs, I decided on a fancy menu. For appetizers, I would make homemade bruschetta with a balsamic glaze. The main course would be a seared steak with garlic butter, mashed potatoes, and a side of roasted asparagus. And for dessert, I had my heart set on a chocolate soufflé. I went shopping, got everything I needed, and then spent hours meticulously prepping. My kitchen looked like a small war zone, but I was committed. I even bought some expensive wine to go with the meal, thinking it would really elevate the experience. By the time Emily arrived, I was feeling pretty confident, perhaps a little too confident. The evening started off well. She was impressed by the ambience I'd set up, candles, soft music, and a table set for two. The bruschetta came out perfectly, and I could see her enjoying it. She was talking and laughing, which put me at ease. I was nailing this. Then came the steak. I'd practiced searing steaks before, but the pressure was different when you have someone you're trying to impress. I was aiming for that perfect medium-rare temperature, and everything seemed to be going according to plan. The garlic butter was melting beautifully, the steak had that nice sear, and the aroma was mouth-watering. I was so proud of my culinary skills, thinking, this is going to be amazing. I plated the food, and just as I was about to bring the plates to the table, disaster struck. As I turned around to present the dishes, I somehow misjudged the angle and tripped over the edge of the rug. I felt my foot slip and my body lurch forward. In what can only be described as a split-second reflex, I thrust my arm forward to catch myself. The plates were still in my hands, so I tried my best to balance them. But as my arm swung forward, it collided with the back of the chair, which caused me to lose my grip on one of the plates. The plate flew out of my hand, and I had a split second to watch in horror as it crashed onto the floor. The steak, my glorious steak, was now scattered all over the carpet, with a pool of garlic butter oozing around it. Emily gasped. I stood there frozen, holding the other plate, which I had somehow managed to save. But I wasn't proud of it. Well, that's not ideal, I muttered. My mind raced for a solution, but before I could come up with anything, Emily looked up at me, her face filled with concern but also a hint of amusement. Are you okay? She asked. I'm fine, I said quickly. Just a little clumsy. I'll clean this up in a second. Let me get you your plate. But as I bent over to retrieve the steak from the floor, things went from bad to worse. I felt a sharp pain shoot up my leg as I accidentally kicked the table. In my attempt to steady myself, I leaned too far to one side and ended up headbutting the chair. The impact wasn't enough to knock me out, but it was enough to send me stumbling backward, my hand gripping the edge of the table for support. As I stumbled, I tried to keep my balance, but that's when I hit the chair again, this time right in the nose. I staggered back with a yelp of pain, clutching my face. Blood immediately began pouring from my nose. I was stunned. There I was, in the middle of this supposed romantic dinner, bleeding like a scene from a horror movie. Emily looked horrified as she rushed toward me. Are you okay? She cried, grabbing a paper towel from the counter. What happened? I think I broke my nose, I said through clenched teeth, holding my hands to my face. Okay, just sit down, Emily said, trying to calm me down. We need to stop the bleeding. She quickly grabbed some ice, but the damage had been done. I could feel my nose swelling and throbbing. Despite the pain, I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of the situation. The evening was supposed to be a beautiful, romantic meal, and now I was sitting at the table, my nose a bloody mess, with half a steak on the floor and no dessert in sight. Emily looked at me, shaking her head but with a slight grin creeping onto her face. "I didn't think this was what I was signing up for," she said, half joking, half concerned. We ended up calling an Uber to take me to the emergency room. I had to spend several hours there while they cleaned up the mess, and fortunately, it turned out I hadn't actually broken my nose, just badly bruised it. The doctor put a nasal splint on, and I was told to take it easy for the next few days. When we got back to my apartment, Emily was incredibly sweet, helping me clean up the mess I had made. She even said she still had a good time despite the chaos. In the days that followed, I couldn't help but laugh at myself. I had wanted to impress her, but instead, I ended up looking like a complete idiot. Fortunately, Emily didn't seem to mind too much. In fact, she told me later that she found the whole situation endearing, which was a relief. I don't think I've ever been more embarrassed in my life, but somehow, we were still dating after that night. So yeah, I tried to impress my girlfriend with a fancy dinner, and it ended with me in the ER with a broken nose and a very bruised ego. At least we got a funny story out of it, though. TIFU by accidentally sabotaging my best friend's wedding, and it all started with a simple misunderstanding over a seating arrangement. Let me start from the beginning. I, 29, have known Sarah, my best friend, for over 15 years. We've been through everything together, from high school drama to drunken college nights, heartbreaks, and, of course, life's ups and downs. When Sarah got engaged to Josh, I was over the moon for her. I was determined to do everything I could to make sure her wedding day was perfect. A few months before the wedding, Sarah called me up and asked if I would be the MC for the reception. Basically, I would be in charge of making announcements, introducing speeches, and keeping the event running smoothly. I was honored. I've done a little public speaking, so I figured I could handle it. Sarah was thrilled when I agreed. This was my big chance to be involved in such a huge moment of her life, and I wanted to make her proud. Fast forward to the day before the wedding. I had been helping Sarah with various last-minute tasks, including some coordination with the venue and confirming guest lists. Sarah and I had never been the best at planning things, but we worked well together, and it was all falling into place. She asked me to help with the seating arrangements for the reception. The seating was a bit tricky because there were a few people who didn't get along very well, and some that Sarah wanted to keep far apart for obvious reasons. The venue had a giant ballroom, and there were long rows of tables with assigned seating. I was given a seating chart and asked to double-check the placement of certain individuals. Easy enough, right? Well, apparently not for me. Here's where I messed up. Sarah had a very specific order in mind for the seating. She wanted her family on one side of the room, Josh's family on the other, and the bridal party seated in a special section. There were a couple of people who had a history of tension, and she wanted them seated as far apart as possible. But I misunderstood her instructions. I thought she wanted the seating to be organized by how close people were to her, so I started mixing things up. I put some distant relatives next to the bridal party, thinking it would make the event feel more intimate. I moved her cousin, who hadn't spoken to Sarah in over 5 years, right next to her parents, who, by the way, didn't particularly care for the cousin. I didn't think it was that big of a deal at the time. I thought it would be one of those things that no one would notice, right? But oh boy, I was wrong. The night of the wedding arrived, and the whole event was beautiful. Sarah looked stunning in her gown, and Josh was grinning from ear to ear. The ceremony was perfect, and everyone was in high spirits. I was doing my job as MC, making sure everything went according to plan, announcing the bridal party and speeches. All was well until we reached the reception dinner. That's when the first sign of trouble appeared. I had just finished announcing the newlyweds' grand entrance into the reception hall, and everyone was ready to sit down. Sarah's parents were the first to take their seats, and that's when the chaos started. Sarah's dad, a usually mild-mannered man, looked at the seating chart and pointed at the empty seat next to him. His face went white. "Why is she sitting there?" he muttered, almost too quietly for me to hear. I was confused but assumed maybe there had been a small error, so I quickly checked the seating chart. That's when I realized my massive mistake. I had mistakenly seated Sarah's cousin, the one who'd had a falling out with her family, next to her parents. Her dad was furious. Before I could even step in and try to fix it, he stormed up to the front of the room, asking for a change in seats. But the damage was already done. A few other people noticed the seating mishap, and some of Sarah's relatives began exchanging glances. Suddenly, whispers spread like wildfire, and I could feel the tension building. I tried to laugh it off, but it was becoming impossible to ignore. Things escalated quickly after that. During the meal, some guests became upset that they were seated with people they didn't know or didn't get along with. One of Sarah's childhood friends, who was seated next to her aunt, started arguing with her aunt over a disagreement that had happened years ago. Meanwhile, Josh's aunt, who had been seated far away from her sister, began complaining loudly to anyone who would listen. The more people talked, the more awkward the atmosphere became. It didn't stop there. The worst part was that Sarah noticed everything. As soon as the dinner started winding down and the dancing was about to begin, she came up to me, visibly upset. "What happened to the seating? Why are people so angry?" she asked, her voice trembling. I tried to brush it off, telling her everything was fine, but she could see the tension in the room. The energy was off. That's when she pulled me aside and asked what had happened with the seating chart. I swallowed hard, realizing that I had royally screwed up. "I thought you wanted it to be based on closeness," I admitted, feeling the weight of my mistake. Her face dropped. "You moved people around? You didn't follow the chart I gave you," she asked, her voice rising. I tried to apologize, but I could tell it was too late. The damage had already been done. Sarah was livid. She went over to her parents, and after a tense conversation, they left the reception early. Sarah's cousin, who had been seated at her parents' table, left as well. The rest of the night was filled with awkward conversations and forced smiles, but the mood was permanently shifted. To make matters worse, Josh was upset with me, too. He was trying to keep things under control, but it was clear that he wasn't happy with the mess I'd caused. At one point, I overheard him telling Sarah's mom, "This isn't what we planned. It's going to be a disaster." It wasn't until the next morning that I fully grasped just how badly I had messed up. Sarah called me, and I could hear the hurt in her voice. "I can't believe you did that," she said. "You ruined the one thing I was counting on going smoothly. I wanted to crawl into a hole and never come out. I had ruined my best friend's wedding, all because of a stupid mistake with a seating chart." I tried to apologize profusely, but words couldn't fix the damage I had done. To this day, I still feel the weight of that disaster. Sarah and I are still friends, but it's clear that the wedding day was a turning point in our relationship. I don't know if I'll ever truly be forgiven, but I've learned a valuable lesson about communication. And maybe, just maybe, I'll leave the seating arrangements to the professionals from now on. So, yeah. That's my TIFU. I sabotaged my best friend's wedding without even realizing it. Hey, friends. If you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what can be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. TIFU by trying to impress my crush with a homemade dinner, and accidentally turning it into the worst night of my life. It all started about a month ago when I met Emily, this amazing girl at work. She had everything, beauty, brains, and this infectious energy that made everyone around her smile. After a few casual chats by the coffee machine and some light banter during lunch breaks, I was hooked. And from the way she laughed at my stupid jokes, I was starting to think she might feel the same way. Now, I'm not the type of guy who just falls for someone at first sight. But something about Emily made my heart race every time I saw her. So, naturally, I decided to do something bold and invite her out for dinner. But then I had an epiphany: why go to a restaurant when I could cook for her? A homemade dinner would show effort, right? It was the perfect plan, personal, intimate, and impressive. What could go wrong? The first step was picking a recipe. I'm no Gordon Ramsay, but I can make a decent meal. Or so I thought. After some serious consideration, I settled on making a pasta dish, something simple yet elegant. I figured I'd go with a creamy garlic Alfredo pasta. Not too complicated, but still a little fancy. I wanted her to think I was sophisticated, not someone who'd accidentally burned his microwave popcorn. I spent hours planning the meal. I made a list, checked it twice, and headed to the store with the confidence of someone who had watched more than enough cooking shows to be an expert. The grocery store was a bit of a disaster. I had a moment of panic when I couldn't find garlic powder. What if I looked like a fool in front of her? But I eventually found it in the spice aisle, next to some weirdly labeled herb called garlic salt. At this point, I thought I could just use that, even though I knew deep down it wasn't exactly what I needed. But I was committed. I was going to make this work. The next day, I prepped everything meticulously. I chopped the garlic, and yes, I crushed some of my fingers in the process, but I kept going, sautéed the chicken, I didn't burn it, and boiled the pasta without any issues. It was starting to come together, and I could already imagine Emily's reaction when she tasted my gourmet cooking. Now, the sauce. This was the tricky part. I thought I had nailed it when I mixed cream and butter with garlic salt. In hindsight, I should have used real garlic powder. The sauce came out super thick, almost like glue, but I convinced myself it was fine. I added more cream, more butter, and then the Parmesan cheese. At this point, the sauce had taken on an orange hue, not quite the pale cream color I was expecting, but I was too far in to turn back. It tasted, well, not good, but it wasn't awful, I thought. By the time Emily arrived at my apartment, I was a bundle of nerves. I greeted her with a smile that probably looked more like a grimace, but she didn't seem to notice. We exchanged pleasantries, and I tried to act calm and confident, like I wasn't sweating bullets. She complimented my place, and I thought, okay, this is going well. But then, as soon as we sat down at the table, I felt the air grow heavy with the anticipation of the meal. I brought out the pasta, and I could tell by the look on her face that she was trying to be polite. She took a bite. Then another. She chewed slowly. I was too nervous to speak, so I just watched her. She swallowed, looked at me, and said, this is interesting. That's when I realized something was terribly wrong. Her expression wasn't the one I was hoping for. It wasn't disgust, but it wasn't the admiration I'd been picturing in my head all week either. It was somewhere in between. Do you like it? I asked, trying to sound casual even though my insides were twisting into knots. She smiled faintly and replied, it's definitely unique. Very cheesy. Yeah, it's a pretty cheesy recipe, I said, laughing nervously, hoping she wouldn't dive too deep into the critique. But then, as if things couldn't get worse, my stomach started growling loudly. Emily raised an eyebrow, clearly startled, and I awkwardly laughed it off. She seemed to ignore it, but I couldn't help but feel like the whole situation was unraveling. I ate my own pasta, determined to show her I was enjoying it, but every bite felt like chewing on something that had been left out for too long. The sauce was thick and sticky, and the texture of the pasta was off. It was like I had somehow managed to overcook and undercook it all at once. But I pushed through, swallowing mouthfuls of food that I couldn't even describe as okay. She seemed to sense my discomfort because, after a few more attempts to hide her unease, she finally put her fork down and looked me in the eyes. Hey, I really appreciate the effort. It's just not my favorite thing. I felt like my heart dropped into my stomach. She was too nice to just say it outright, but I could tell that my dinner was an absolute disaster. The silence between us was deafening. I tried to salvage the situation by suggesting we move on to dessert. I had baked a cheesecake the night before, a simple, no-bake recipe I found online. I wasn't an expert baker, but it was something I could manage. However, when I cut into it, it didn't hold its shape at all. It looked more like a puddle of cream with a thin, sad crust. And when I offered it to Emily, she gave me a hesitant smile and said, "Maybe later." At that point, I knew it was over. The evening had gone from mildly uncomfortable to complete disaster. We finished the dinner in awkward silence, with me apologizing more times than I could count. Emily was polite enough to stay, but I could see her eyes scanning the clock as if trying to figure out the most socially acceptable way to escape. Finally, when she got up to leave, she gave me a hug, which felt like a formality more than anything. "I had a really nice time," she said, but the words felt empty. "We should definitely do this again sometime." I smiled weakly, knowing full well that doing this again was not in her plans. After she left, I stood in my kitchen for a long time, staring at the remains of my disastrous meal. The half-eaten pasta, the cheesecake that looked like a sad, collapsed dream, and the half-empty wine bottle that I had opened in an attempt to be sophisticated all reminded me that I had completely screwed up. In hindsight, I should have just taken her to a restaurant like a normal person. Or at least not attempted to cook an entire meal when I clearly didn't know what I was doing. But instead, I tried to impress her with my cooking skills, which were non-existent. I'm not sure what went wrong exactly, but I know one thing for sure: Emily is probably telling her friends about the worst dinner experience of her life right now. And me? I learned the hard way that trying to impress someone by cooking a fancy dinner when you can't even get the sauce right is a recipe for disaster. TIFU by thinking I could skip a few steps and build my dream garden without considering all the consequences. It all started about 2 years ago when I moved into my new home. I was ecstatic. After years of apartment living, I finally had a place to call my own. The house was cute, had everything I needed, and the best part was the backyard. It was a blank canvas. A little overgrown, sure, but that just meant there was potential for me to turn it into something amazing. At first, I had visions of a perfect little oasis. A flower bed with colorful blooms, a small vegetable garden where I could grow my own food, a swing to relax in, and maybe even a fire pit. I was excited, but I had no real gardening experience beyond growing a few succulents in my apartment. But I thought, how hard can it be? It's just digging and planting, right? So, I jumped straight into planning without doing too much research. I ordered a bunch of plants from an online nursery, bought a few bags of soil, and borrowed my friend's shovel. I didn't bother to measure anything or read about soil types, or how to actually prepare the ground. In my mind, I had a vision and I was determined to execute it. I started with the flower bed. I'd seen enough Pinterest posts to know what I was doing. I dug out a small section of the lawn, removed the weeds, and put in some soil and mulch. Then I just plopped the plants in. No real rhyme or reason to the spacing, I just stuck them in wherever they seemed to fit. I thought they'd grow and fill in the space over time. Next came the vegetable garden. I had no idea what I was doing here either, but I figured I'd plant a few tomatoes, some peppers, and maybe some carrots. I dug another hole, tossed in some tomato plants and pepper seedlings, and then thought, this is going to be amazing. I'll be eating fresh vegetables all year long. But things didn't go according to plan. Not by a long shot. First, I realized I had planted the flowers and vegetables too close together. The tomatoes were shading the peppers, and the flowers were crowding out the carrots. It didn't help that I had picked plants that weren't compatible with the climate or soil conditions in my area. I didn't consider how much sunlight each plant needed or how much water they required. The soil was too dense in some spots and too sandy in others. I had essentially created an ecosystem that was in total chaos. By the time I realized this, the plants had already started to wilt. The flowers weren't blooming, the vegetables were stunted, and some of the plants had already started to die off. I felt defeated. But rather than admit defeat and start over, I decided to fix things. I pulled up the dead plants, tried to rearrange the garden, and added more soil and mulch. I even went out and bought a few more plants to fill in the gaps. Of course, I didn't bother to consider that adding too many plants to an already crowded space would only make things worse. The vegetable garden didn't fare any better. One morning, I went out to check on the tomatoes, only to find that something had been eating the leaves. I assumed it was just some neighborhood squirrels or rabbits, so I put up some mesh netting to protect the plants. But the damage continued. I had no idea what was eating them. A week later, I noticed something even more alarming. I had a strange yellowing on some of the leaves. I thought it might be some sort of disease, so I started Googling. And that's when I learned about soil pH levels, root rot, and pests like aphids and root maggots. Apparently, my gardening skills were so off the mark that I had created a buffet for all kinds of pests and diseases. I decided I needed to step up my game. I went to the local hardware store and bought a fancy soil tester, some bug spray, and organic pesticides. I meticulously measured the pH of my soil, and it turned out that it was way too acidic for most of the plants I had chosen. So, I had to add lime to balance it out. I sprayed every plant with pesticide and did my best to correct my mistakes. But, of course, things didn't get better immediately. I had to watch my dream garden slowly wither away in front of my eyes. The plants didn't respond as quickly as I had hoped. The tomatoes didn't grow any bigger, the peppers never really flourished, and the flowers just wouldn't bloom. On top of all this, the insects kept coming back. I found myself spending hours every weekend tending to the garden, watering, pruning, applying more pesticide, and making endless adjustments, but it was clear that I was in way over my head. Then came the final straw. About a month ago, I woke up one morning and went out to check on everything. To my horror, the entire vegetable garden had been completely destroyed. It wasn't pests this time. It was something far worse, a family of raccoons. I stood there, stunned, as I stared at the wreckage. The tomatoes were gone, the peppers were uprooted, and the soil was completely dug up. Even the plants that were still alive had been trampled. The raccoons had completely ransacked my garden. I had no idea how they'd managed to do it so efficiently. That day, I broke down. I had spent so much time, money, and effort on this garden. It had been my dream, and now it was gone. I felt like a failure. Maybe gardening wasn't for me. In a moment of despair, I called my friend who had let me borrow the shovel, venting about everything that had gone wrong. She listened patiently, then offered the simplest, most humbling advice I had ever heard: you need to start with a professional. Hire someone to design the garden for you. You don't have to do it all yourself. It was like a light bulb went off in my head. I didn't have to know everything, I just had to know when to ask for help. A week later, I hired a landscaping company. They came in, assessed the space, and created a garden plan that made sense. They worked with me on plant choices that would thrive in my area, ensuring that the soil was properly prepared, and they even helped me design a sustainable watering system. They also put up barriers to keep the raccoons out. It's still a work in progress, but at least now I can see the vision coming to life without feeling overwhelmed or defeated. The flowers are finally blooming, the vegetables are growing, slowly, but steadily, and I can sit on the swing I bought last summer and relax. The moral of the story? Don't be like me. Don't dive into something as complicated as gardening without doing proper research or getting expert advice. Sometimes it's better to hire a professional than to try to DIY everything. You might save yourself a lot of time, money, and heartbreak in the long run. TLDR, tried to build my dream garden without doing proper research, ended up with a mess of dead plants, pests, and raccoons. Learned the hard way that it's okay to ask for help and hire professionals when needed. TIFU by accidentally sending my best friend's nudes to my mom. It all started innocently enough. My best friend, let's call her Emily, and I had been inseparable since high school. We shared everything, our favorite shows, gossip, and, naturally, all the ridiculous pictures we took to document our weird sense of humor. There were endless selfies, stupid memes, and yes, a few nudes that we shared for reasons I still don't completely understand. Sometimes, we'd send them in jest or after a few too many drinks, more of a haha, look at me, I'm a hot mess sort of thing. But we trusted each other implicitly, knowing that the other person would never share them. One evening, I had just gotten home from work and was lying on the couch scrolling through my phone, trying to unwind. I had a couple of messages from Emily, mostly memes and random inside jokes. As I scrolled, I came across a picture of her that was, well, less than classy. It was one of those pictures she'd sent in a rare moment of trying to be sultry, and I couldn't help but laugh at how over the top the pose was. I should have just moved on, but I thought it would be hilarious to send it to my group chat with my best friend, Sarah, and my mom, who I always kept in touch with about everything, especially since we'd had a casual conversation earlier about body positivity. I figured it would be funny, harmless, just a joke that we could all laugh about. However, as I tapped my screen, my finger accidentally brushed the mom contact at the very top of my chat list. Let me explain something. I don't think my mom had ever seen a nude photo in her life. Or at least, I thought she hadn't. She was pretty old school, a bit prudish, and we never really talked about anything that involved the adult side of things. So, when I saw that my mom was listed first in my recent contacts, I didn't think twice. I tapped the send button, and the message was off. At first, nothing happened. I figured it had gone to the group chat, and I was ready for some laughter to roll in from both Sarah and Emily. But as the seconds passed, I noticed something strange. There was no notification in my group chat. Instead, I received a text from my mom. "Why would you send me this?" I froze. I wasn't sure if she was just joking or if there had been some mistake. But I immediately checked my phone. Sure enough, the text had gone to her. Not the group chat. Just her. And it was the picture of Emily in all her glory, looking absurd and ridiculous, which, of course, was the point. The caption I had added, trying to make light of the whole thing, said, "Just found this gem, thought it was funny. Enjoy." My stomach dropped. I immediately started typing a response, but then another text from my mom popped up. "Why would Emily send this to you? You know she's a minor, right?" My hands were shaking. Oh God. This was the worst thing that had ever happened to me. My heart started racing. I knew my mom wasn't trying to be mean, but she was, without a doubt, the last person who needed to see something like this. I couldn't even imagine how Emily would react if she found out. She would absolutely flip. I went into full panic mode. I tried calling my mom. No answer. I called her again. Still nothing. I sent her a frantic text, "Oh my God, Moem, I am so sorry. That was meant for my friends, not you. I don't even know how it happened. Please don't make a big deal out of this." No reply. At this point, I was losing my mind. I texted Emily immediately, hoping to salvage whatever was left of our friendship. Please call me now. I did a really stupid thing." She responded almost immediately. "What did you do? Please tell me you're okay. Did you get a weird text from me, like 20 minutes ago? I swear I didn't mean to send it to my mom. I sent it to the wrong chat and now I think she saw it." Emily took a second to respond. My anxiety level shot through the roof. What was she going to say? WTF? "Are you kidding me?" she replied. "You seriously sent that to your mom?" "I swear, it was a mistake. Please don't hate me. You literally sent me nudes to your mom? What is wrong with you?" I felt like I could physically feel the air being sucked out of the room. "I didn't mean to. I'm sorry. I'm freaking out right now. I think she saw it, but she's not responding, and I'm too scared to talk to her. Please don't tell me you're going to hate me. I don't know what to say. I can't even process this." I sat there for a while, staring at the phone, waiting for some sort of miracle. The silence was deafening. I was preparing for the worst. My mom would either be furious or embarrassed, Emily would never speak to me again, and I'd have to deal with the fallout of this stupid mistake for the rest of my life. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, my mom called. I answered on the first ring. "Sweetie," she said softly, sounding like she was trying to keep her voice steady. "What the hell was that? Why on earth would you send me something like that?" I felt my chest tighten. "Mom, I am so sorry. I didn't mean to send it to you. It was meant for a group chat with my friends. I accidentally sent it to you instead. Don't you ever send me something like that again," she said, sounding more stern than I had ever heard her before. "I'm really disappointed in you. I thought we had better communication than this." I know. I'm an idiot. Please don't be mad at me." "I'm not mad, just disappointed. It's not appropriate, and I'm sure Emily didn't mean for that to be sent to you either." "I swear, Mom, it was a mistake. I'll make sure to never do something like that again." There was a long pause. "I'll talk to Emily. But you need to make sure you're not sending these kinds of pictures around. It's not funny." I nodded as if she could see me, unable to form any more words. "I'm not mad," she said again, but her tone softened. "Just please don't ever make this mistake again. And be careful who you're sending stuff to." That was the extent of the conversation. I was mortified. It felt like the longest 20-minute phone call of my life. When I hung up, I texted Emily again to apologize and assure her everything was okay. She didn't respond immediately, but eventually, she did. "I'm pissed. But I'll get over it. Don't ever send my stuff to your mom again." After a few more back and forths of us both apologizing, things seemed to settle. My mom never brought it up again, and Emily forgave me, though, admittedly, she made sure to never send me anything even remotely suggestive ever again. The worst part is that I think my mom still thinks Emily is some kind of loose cannon. She probably imagines she's secretly a rebellious teenager who's sending all kinds of wild pictures to my daughter. Little does she know, it was actually all me. So, I learned my lesson: never ever send anything you wouldn't want your parents to see. And, more importantly, don't try to joke about things you shouldn't even be joking about in the first place. It only leads to mortifying conversations with your mom that you'll never be able to forget. And as for Emily, I swear, the next time she sends me a picture like that, I'll make sure to double-check the recipient list, especially before my mom gets a glimpse. TIFU: by accidentally getting myself banned from an online gaming community I've been a part of for years, and it all started with a simple misunderstanding that spiraled out of control. So, a bit of background: I'm a die-hard fan of an online multiplayer game that I've been playing for years. I'm part of a small but tight-knit community, and we all get along great. We've been playing together for so long that we've started to form lasting friendships, even outside of the game. It's a place where we share tips, memes, and sometimes even vent about our daily lives. If you've ever been part of an online community that feels like a second family, you know how much it can mean to you. That was me, for years. Now, let me give you some context about my reputation in the community. I've always been known as a chill, easygoing player. I don't rage when I lose, I don't gloat when I win, and I try to help out new players when they ask for advice. I'm by no means the best player in the game, but I hold my own and am known for being a reliable team member. That's why when I joined this specific server, let's call it Gamers United, I felt comfortable. It was a place where I could joke around, play, and enjoy myself without worrying too much about being competitive. So, the story starts on a Saturday afternoon. I'm sitting down for a few hours of gaming, and I notice the server is a bit quieter than usual. A few regulars are online, but not as many people are chatting in the general chat as usual. After a couple of hours of playing, a new player joins the server. He's a bit of a noob, and I can tell right away because he's asking a lot of basic questions and clearly hasn't played much before. Normally, I'd offer some advice and go back to what I was doing, but today, I was feeling a little more chatty than usual, so I decided to mess around a bit and give him some advice that, in hindsight, was clearly misinterpreted. Here's where the screw-up happened. I thought I'd be funny, so when the new guy asked a basic question about the game mechanics, something like, "What do I do when I run out of ammo?" I decided to answer with something that sounded semi-plausible but was obviously ridiculous. I said, "Just press Ctrl plus Alt plus Delete and the game will reload your ammo for you. It's a secret cheat code that only the pros know about." Now, to anyone who knows the game, it's obvious this is a joke. It's not even close to being real advice. But apparently, this new player didn't know that, and he took me seriously. He starts panicking in the chat, asking if it's true and whether he should try it. I try to play it off, saying, "Nah, I'm just messing with you. It's not real." But by that point, it was too late. The new guy, in his confusion, actually tried the cheat code while in the middle of a game. Obviously, nothing happened. He got frustrated and typed out a long message in the chat, saying something along the lines of, "WTF? I tried what you said and now my game is lagging. What did you do to my game?" I tried to apologize and explain that I was just joking, but he was having none of it. Here's the thing. The server had a strict rule about no trolling and no spreading misinformation, which I had completely forgotten about. The new guy, not knowing I was joking, took it straight to the server admins. He posted a report about me, saying that I was giving bad advice and intentionally trying to mess up his game. Now, at this point, I was still convinced that this whole thing would blow over. I mean, it was just a harmless prank, right? But then, the unexpected happened. The server admins, who are all super serious about the integrity of the game and its community, took the situation very seriously. I received a message from one of the admins, asking me to explain myself. I gave a detailed response, explaining that it was all a misunderstanding and that I was just trying to be funny. I thought it would be enough. I really did. Instead, the admin replied with something like, "We don't tolerate trolling in any form. Your behavior disrupted the game experience of a new player, and we've had multiple complaints from other members about your conduct in the past." I was shocked. I didn't even know I had other complaints against me. I was being told that they were considering a temporary ban. I tried to reason with them, explaining that I had been a part of the community for years and that it was all just a joke. But they didn't budge. They said I needed to take a break from the server to cool off and rethink my actions. And then, they hit me with the ultimate punishment, a permanent ban. My heart sank. I couldn't believe it. After years of playing and building friendships, it all came crashing down because of one stupid joke. One mistake. To make matters worse, I found out that the new player who had reported me didn't just report me to the admins. He went to the entire community and told everyone about what happened. Suddenly, the entire server knew my name, and not for any of the good reasons I had hoped for. People started messaging me, some supportive, some furious. One player even sent me a message saying, "You ruined my experience on the game with that crap. Thanks for nothing." I tried to explain myself to some of the players who were upset, but most of them didn't want to hear it. My reputation was in tatters. I tried to appeal the ban, but the admins were firm. They wouldn't even consider lifting it. They said it was a zero-tolerance policy, and that breaking the rules was breaking the rules, no matter the intent. And just like that, I was permanently banned from the game and the community I had spent years being a part of. I went from a trusted member to a persona non grata in the blink of an eye. In the days that followed, I couldn't help but reflect on how something so small, a harmless prank, could turn into such a huge disaster. I spent hours reading through my old messages and chats, trying to figure out where I went wrong. What could I have done differently? Was it really worth it? Was the joke even funny? In the end, the whole situation taught me a valuable lesson about online communities and the importance of understanding the rules. I realized that what I thought was harmless fun wasn't perceived that way by others, especially in a space where the community values integrity and professionalism. Maybe it wasn't the best idea to joke around like that in a game with serious players. But it's too late now. I'm banned, and the community that once felt like home is no longer a place I can go. So, yeah, TIFU by trying to prank a new player, thinking it would be funny, and ultimately getting myself permanently banned from a gaming community I'd been a part of for years. Lesson learned the hard way. TIFU by accidentally causing a complete meltdown at a wedding I was attending. It all started innocently enough. I had been invited to the wedding of a distant cousin, someone I hadn't really kept in touch with but who, for whatever reason, decided to invite me to their big day. I had to fly across the country, which meant I didn't really know most of the guests or what I was walking into. But it was a wedding, and how bad could it be? I should have known better. The ceremony itself was beautiful, held outdoors in a small, picturesque venue with a fountain and string lights in the trees. The bride looked radiant, the groom looked nervous but happy, and everything was just as you'd expect for a wedding. I was trying to be a good guest, smiling, nodding, pretending like I wasn't as awkward as I felt. But then came the reception, and that's when everything went downhill. The reception was held in a large, somewhat rustic barn on the venue grounds. It was charming, and the decorations were nice, but it was packed, and I was struggling to navigate through all the different groups of people. I didn't know anyone except a few distant relatives, and my anxiety was through the roof. After finding my seat and settling in with some hors d'oeuvres, I noticed a small group at a nearby table that seemed to be laughing a little too loudly. At first, I thought they were just drunk, but then I realized that one of them was the bride's sister, and they were having a pretty heated discussion. I'm not sure how, but somehow I ended up eavesdropping on the conversation. Apparently, the bride's sister was mad about a seating arrangement. It turned out that she had been assigned to a table with people she didn't know well, and she was furious. As she continued to complain, the conversation turned into something even more dramatic. I learned that the bride and her sister hadn't been on the best terms for the last few months. The sister was upset that the bride had chosen to invite her ex-boyfriend to the wedding, someone the sister was still clearly bitter about. The whole thing sounded like a soap opera, but it was too juicy not to listen to. At that point, I was trying to finish my drink and pretend like I wasn't listening in, but then the sister dropped a bombshell. She started talking about how the bride had stolen the groom from one of her best friends, and that's why she didn't want to be at the wedding at all. According to the sister, the bride had been secretly dating the groom while his ex-fiancé was still under the impression that they were getting married. The ex-fiancé was one of the other guests at the wedding, sitting a few tables away. I froze. I mean, I had no idea if this was true or not, but it sounded like something straight out of a bad reality TV show. I looked around, trying to gauge how everyone else was reacting, and noticed that a few people at nearby tables were looking over, clearly intrigued by the conversation happening at the loud table. In my head, I started telling myself that I shouldn't get involved, that it was none of my business, and I should just keep to myself. But then it happened. I wasn't paying enough attention to the fact that the ex-fiancé was now walking toward the table, and before I could stop myself, I blurted out, "Wait, are you talking about the groom's ex? The one in the pink dress?" The table went silent, and I realized too late that I had just pointed out the ex-fiancé to the entire group. She was about 10 feet away from us at this point, and I could see her face redden as she stared directly at me. The bride's sister saw her too and immediately stopped talking. There was a tense moment of silence before the ex-fiancé looked straight at me, walked up to the table, and asked, "What exactly are you talking about?" My heart dropped. I wasn't sure what to do, but before I could say anything, the bride's sister stood up and shouted, "You have some nerve, don't you? Talking about me like I'm the villain here when it was you who was sleeping with him behind my back." The entire barn went silent. It was as if everyone had stopped breathing for a moment. The ex-fiancé shot back, "I don't know what you're talking about, but you're a joke. If you hadn't been such a drama queen and tried to ruin my relationship with him, maybe we'd still be together. And by the way, I'm not the one who stole him from anyone. He chose me, not you." The tension in the room was palpable. Guests were looking from one side to the other, whispering, and I felt like I had just triggered a full-blown family feud. Before anyone could respond, the bride, who had clearly heard everything by now, rushed over, visibly upset, and shouted at both of them, "Stop. Not here, not today." But it was too late. The ex-fiancé turned and stormed out, her heels clicking loudly against the wooden floor as she exited the barn. The bride's sister followed, muttering insults under her breath as she marched after her. People in the room started murmuring, some trying to defuse the situation while others were clearly entertained by the drama unfolding before them. I was frozen, not knowing whether to apologize, run away, or just crawl into a hole and disappear. But before I could do anything, the bride turned to me and, through gritted teeth, asked, "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" I could feel every eye in the room on me. My face was burning, and all I could do was stammer out, I didn't mean to. I just overheard, "Great." "Just great," the bride snapped, before turning her back to me and rushing off after her sister. The rest of the night was a blur. The reception had turned into a disaster. Some guests tried to salvage what was left, but you could tell the atmosphere had changed. People were still talking about what had just happened, and the drama lingered in the air. It was clear that the wedding was no longer the joyful celebration it had been intended to be. At the end of the night, I couldn't wait to leave. I felt terrible about the whole situation, but also completely embarrassed that I had accidentally instigated it. I'm sure I'll never be invited to another family event again, at least not one where the bride and her sister are involved. Looking back, I still can't believe I got tangled up in someone else's drama like that. It was an absolute mess, and I've learned my lesson: always mind your own business, especially at weddings. They're supposed to be about love, not drama. Unfortunately, I learned that the hard way. TLDR, I accidentally eavesdropped on a heated family argument at a wedding, ended up pointing out the ex-fiancé to the bride's sister, and caused a huge family feud that ruined the reception. So, last weekend, I made what is probably the biggest mistake of my life, and it all started with me trying to impress my new girlfriend. Let me set the scene. I'm in my mid-20s, recently started dating someone I met through mutual friends. Her name's Sarah, and she's a self-described foodie with an obsession for authentic experiences. I'd been seeing her for a few weeks and felt like things were going pretty well, until the weekend of the event. Now, I'm not a chef. I can cook enough to not starve, but the idea of whipping up something gourmet has always been outside my comfort zone. However, Sarah kept talking about how much she loved small, intimate dinner parties, and how much she appreciated when people made an effort. She'd even told me about a super trendy, hard-to-book restaurant in town, the kind of place that requires reservations months in advance, that she had wanted to try for ages. I knew this was the perfect opportunity to do something special for her, impress her with my skills, and show her I could be the kind of guy who would go out of his way to make her happy. So, after doing some extensive online research about cooking classes, I stumbled across an event that looked perfect, a farm-to-table cooking experience hosted by a popular chef in the area. The class promised to teach participants how to cook a multi-course meal using fresh, local ingredients. Sounds fancy, right? I signed up for it immediately, even though I had no idea what farm-to-table meant other than it sounded healthy and upscale. The event was set for Saturday afternoon, so I made sure Sarah knew about it, hyping it up as a surprise. She was thrilled. At first, I thought she was just excited because she loved cooking and local ingredients, but now I know she was probably just too polite to admit how terrible of an idea this was going to be. Saturday rolled around, and I showed up to the venue. It was a small, rustic farmhouse located a good 30-minute drive outside the city. The building was charming, but the last thing I should have done was ignore the sheer lack of warning signs that this was not a normal cooking class. For one, it wasn't a class in the traditional sense, it was just a bunch of people standing around an open kitchen while an eccentric chef shouted instructions in a thick accent. The entire thing was chaos. The chef was a loud, jovial guy in his 40s who seemed to have no interest in actually teaching us anything. He was too busy making jokes about the origin of the ingredients and passing out knives like candy. His assistant was nowhere to be found, and the whole event felt more like a food-themed circus than an educational experience. At first, it seemed like it was going to be fun, until it became clear that I had no idea what I was doing. We started off by making a wild mushroom risotto, which sounded simple enough. I could follow a recipe, right? But the chef had us using random mushrooms that I'd never seen before. Some were so exotic that I'm still not sure they were legal. The whole thing was a mess from the start. I didn't have the first clue how to chop mushrooms properly, and I definitely didn't know how to handle hot oil without causing an accident. But that wasn't the worst part. When it came time to add the stock to the risotto, the chef gave us a weird look and handed me a huge pot of broth, claiming it was handcrafted by the finest local cows. I wasn't sure what that meant, but I was determined to be a good sport and follow along. It wasn't until I added the broth to the pan that I realized I was an idiot. I was supposed to simmer it first, not dump the whole thing into the pan like I was making soup. To make matters worse, Sarah was standing right beside me, trying her best to help. She was better at cooking than I was, no surprise there, but her enthusiasm quickly turned to mild concern as I realized I had no idea what I was doing. The risotto was turning into a burnt, mushy disaster, and I could feel her trying to hide her awkwardness. We moved on to the next course, a pan-seared salmon with an herb-infused butter sauce. By this point, I was feeling pretty frazzled, but I convinced myself that I could still salvage the situation. I grabbed the salmon fillets and slapped them onto the pan with all the grace of a sleep-deprived raccoon. What I didn't realize was that I had cranked the heat up to full blast, and now the salmon was sticking to the pan like it was welded on. The more I tried to salvage it, the worse it got. Sarah was trying not to laugh at the poor fish, which, by now, had the consistency of cardboard. The chef noticed my struggle and came over to help, but instead of offering advice, he berated me for not respecting the fish, as if it had somehow developed a personality of its own. Meanwhile, the rest of the class was waiting to be served, and I was still in full meltdown mode. At some point, I managed to throw together a passable version of the salmon, but it was so far removed from anything resembling the photo on the menu that it looked like an insult to fish everywhere. Sarah, bless her heart, tried to eat it with a straight face, but I could tell she was struggling. She later admitted that the salmon had the texture of a sponge. We finally moved on to the dessert course, an elaborate chocolate soufflé. By this point, my confidence was gone, but I wasn't about to give up. I could follow a soufflé recipe, right? How hard could it be? The soufflé batter was supposed to rise perfectly and look like something from a Michelin-starred restaurant. But instead, it deflated faster than my ego. When it came time to serve everything, I realized just how much I'd screwed up. The risotto was a watery mess, the salmon was an embarrassing failure, and the soufflé looked like a deflated balloon. Sarah, to her credit, said everything was fine, but I could see the awkwardness in her eyes. To make it even worse, the chef insisted on serving everything family style, which meant I had to present this disaster to the rest of the class like it was some kind of gourmet masterpiece. As the night came to an end, Sarah and I drove home in awkward silence. I was mortified, feeling like I'd completely ruined the evening. The next day, she sent me a message saying, "Well, at least we have a funny story to tell now." I could tell she was trying to make me feel better, but honestly, I think she was just being polite. We're still dating, but I haven't planned another dinner for her since. She's hinted that she wouldn't mind me cooking for her again, but I've learned my lesson. Next time, we're ordering takeout from a place where I don't risk accidentally burning down the house. To anyone thinking of impressing their date with a fancy cooking class, don't. Stick to something simple, like a picnic or a movie. Save yourself the embarrassment and the ruined salmon. Trust me. So, this happened a few weeks ago, and I still can't stop cringing every time I think about it. It all started on a perfectly normal Saturday. I had planned a weekend getaway with my best friend, Amanda, to a cabin in the woods. Just the two of us. No phones, no work, no stress. A chance to recharge and just enjoy some peace and quiet. I was excited, but a little anxious. I haven't really done a lot of solo trips in the past, and I've never gone on one with just a friend before. But I thought it would be fun. I was wrong. The trip itself went fine for the first couple of hours. We got to the cabin, which was super cozy and secluded, exactly what I was looking for. We were both in good spirits, laughing, making jokes, and just soaking in the quiet. We decided to take a walk around the area after we unpacked. It was beautiful, lots of trees, a small stream, and some wildlife. Everything was perfect. That was, until we came across the abandoned shed. We had been walking for about an hour, just chatting, when Amanda pointed out an old, dilapidated shed in the distance. It was overgrown with ivy and moss, sitting at the edge of a small clearing. Naturally, being two curious and adventurous people, we decided to check it out. We made our way over, and the moment we stepped inside, I had this weird gut feeling. It was like something was off, but we ignored it because hey, it was just an old shed, right? Nothing to worry about. We poked around, found a few old tools, some rotting furniture, and some strange boxes shoved in the corner. Then Amanda spotted a strange, old book on one of the shelves. She reached for it, and that's when things started to get weird. The moment her hand touched the book, I felt this sudden drop in temperature. Like, instantly. It was the middle of the day, and yet I could see my breath in the air. We both froze, looking at each other with wide eyes. Amanda was holding the book now, flipping through its pages. I couldn't make out what was written, but I could tell that the words were ancient and wrong somehow. I tried to tell her to put it down, but before I could say anything, she mumbled something under her breath. I didn't catch the words, but I felt this chill go straight to my bones. The next thing I remember is feeling disoriented. The whole world seemed to spin for a moment, and when I looked around, it felt like we were no longer in the woods. It was like the trees had become darker, the sky darker, and the whole air was heavy. I turned to Amanda, and she looked just as confused as I felt. She dropped the book, and that's when I noticed something truly horrifying. The shed door, which had been wide open when we came in, was now locked. It wasn't just shut, it was sealed with some sort of strange, glowing symbol. I tried to push on the door, but it wouldn't budge. We were trapped. Panic set in. Amanda tried calling out, but her voice echoed strangely, like the sound was warped. I don't know what happened next, but I started feeling this overwhelming sense of dread. It was like there was something, or someone, watching us. I looked at Amanda, who was starting to panic herself. She kept muttering that we needed to leave, but I could see the fear in her eyes. That's when we both heard it. A low growl from behind us. We both whipped around, but the shed was empty, nothing was there. But the growl kept getting louder, like it was coming closer. And then we saw it, a figure, slowly creeping out from the shadows. It was tall, unnaturally tall, and its movements were jerky, almost like it wasn't fully there. It didn't have any distinct features at first, but I could see its eyes. They were glowing a bright, sickly green. I screamed, and we both bolted for the door, trying desperately to pull it open. But it wouldn't open. The figure was getting closer now, and I could hear it breathing, loud, heavy breaths. I've never been so terrified in my life. Amanda started banging on the door, yelling, begging for help, but nothing happened. That's when I heard another voice. It was faint, almost a whisper, but it sounded like it was coming from the book. Leave, now /. I can't describe the feeling that washed over me when I heard that. It was like all the color drained from the world, and I was frozen in place. The figure had stopped moving, but it was still there, watching us. And in that moment, I realized that we were not alone in this shed. There were other things in the shadows. I couldn't see them, but I could feel them. I don't know how much time passed, but eventually, the door just opened. It wasn't like anything we did, it just creaked open, like it was giving us permission to leave. We didn't waste any time. We ran out of that shed so fast, I don't think I've ever moved that quickly in my life. The air outside felt different, lighter, somehow. We didn't stop running until we were back at the cabin. We locked all the doors and windows, but neither of us could sleep that night. We sat on the couch, staring at the walls, afraid to close our eyes. I kept hearing that low growl in the distance, but when I looked outside, there was nothing. Nothing except the forest. The next day, we packed up and left early. Neither of us said much, but we both knew that something wasn't right. We didn't talk about it much after that, but I could tell that Amanda was just as shaken up as I was. Now, every time I think about that trip, I can't help but feel like we made a huge mistake. I don't know what we unleashed that day, but I feel like I'll never be the same. The worst part? Every now and then, when I'm alone in my room at night, I swear I hear a faint growl in the distance. And I'm starting to think it might be closer than I want to admit. I can't go back to that cabin, and I certainly can't go back to that shed. But I can't shake the feeling that whatever was there is still watching. I guess that's my TIFU. I should have never opened that book. TIFU by accidentally starting a fire in my apartment with a coffee maker and nearly burning the entire building down. It all started on a regular Tuesday morning. I woke up groggy from an uncomfortably short night's sleep, the kind of sleep where you toss and turn trying to find a comfortable spot, but nothing works. My alarm went off late, and I stumbled out of bed, completely disoriented, and made my way to the kitchen to prepare my morning coffee, something that's become a sacred ritual to me. Now, I live in an older building that's had its fair share of quirks. The plumbing isn't great, the walls are thin, and some of the electrical wiring could probably use a professional's attention. But it's cheap, it's central, and it's the perfect little bachelor pad for a guy like me who values convenience more than actual home safety. So, I grabbed my trusty coffee maker, which I've had for a few years now, and filled it with water while mentally preparing myself for the day ahead. I've used this coffee maker 100 times, and I've never had an issue. I guess that's where my first mistake was, complacency. I plugged the coffee maker in and turned it on, expecting to hear that comforting gurgling sound of hot water brewing. Instead, there was nothing. I fiddled with the buttons, clicked the switch up and down, and even plugged it into a different socket, thinking maybe it had malfunctioned or the power in the kitchen had gone out. After a few minutes of frustration, I checked the plug at the back of the coffee maker. To my horror, the power cord was frayed and exposed in several spots. I had no idea how long it had been like this. It was one of those things I had meant to get fixed but never did. Life happens, right? At this point, I was running on fumes. I had a full day of work ahead of me, and coffee was a necessity, not a luxury. So, what did I do? In my sleep-deprived state, I decided to just make do and wrap the exposed wires with some electrical tape, thinking it would be fine for a while longer. I mean, what could go wrong, right? I was still groggy, but I needed that coffee, so I proceeded with the plan. I wrapped the tape around the wires like a makeshift electrician, plugged it back in, and flipped the switch. Lo and behold, the coffee maker sprang to life. Success. Or so I thought. As I poured myself a glass of water to hydrate while I waited for the coffee, I heard a strange crackling noise coming from the kitchen. It wasn't the usual brewing sound. It was more of a sizzle. I walked into the kitchen, and as I rounded the corner, I saw what I can only describe as a small, controlled electrical fire at the base of the coffee maker. In an instant, my brain scrambled to process what was happening. I panicked and grabbed the closest thing I could find, a dish towel, and tried to smother the fire. That didn't work. The fire only seemed to grow, sending thin plumes of smoke curling upward. I took a step back, realizing that it wasn't just a small electrical fire anymore, it was spreading, and quickly. My heart rate spiked as I realized that I was in serious trouble. My apartment was small, no more than 600 square feet, and the kitchen was right next to the living room. I had no idea how fast the flames could spread or what the heck to do next. My first thought was, okay, just grab the fire extinguisher, but then I froze. Where the hell was it? Oh, right, I don't have one. I started to shout, fire! fire, and instinctively grabbed my phone to call 911. But before I could dial, the entire coffee maker erupted with a loud crack, and a massive spark shot out of the back, followed by a burst of flame. I could feel the heat from across the room. That's when I truly lost it. I bolted for the door, throwing my phone on the couch and forgetting all sense of logic. I sprinted down the hallway of my building, screaming for anyone to help, hoping that maybe someone else had already called the fire department. I reached the elevator and, in my panic, I just pressed the button, even though I was on the second floor. It felt like an eternity waiting for the elevator to arrive. I cursed at myself for not taking the stairs, but my adrenaline was working against me. When the elevator finally opened, I jumped in and pressed the ground floor button like a madman. I think my heart was beating so fast I could hear it in my ears. The elevator made its descent, and I half expected it to crash, given how jittery I was. I finally made it out to the front of the building, and I started pacing. By this time, I could see smoke curling out of the window above mine. The fire was real, and it was bad. The thought of my neighbors, especially the elderly couple next door, being trapped inside made my stomach churn with guilt. I hadn't even thought to check on them before I bolted. Within minutes, I heard sirens approaching, and a fire truck pulled up to the building. Several firemen rushed toward the entrance, and they quickly began evacuating people. By the time the fire was under control, the entire upper floor of the building was filled with smoke. My apartment was basically a smoldering wreck, and the fire had damaged the wiring in the kitchen so much that the building's power was completely knocked out. It would be days before everything was restored. I had to sit there in the parking lot, completely dumbfounded, waiting for the fire department to clear the scene. They asked me a few questions about what happened, and I just stood there like a deer in headlights, still processing what had occurred. I'd never seen something so intense in my life. In the end, the building was left with significant water and smoke damage, but miraculously, no one was hurt. The firemen said that if I had waited even a few more minutes before calling 911, the fire could have spread far beyond just my apartment. As for me, I got lucky. No one sued me for the damage, but I spent the next several weeks apologizing to my neighbors for putting them through such a scare. I still can't believe how easily I let something as trivial as a frayed power cord turn into a disaster. And now, I make sure I check every appliance I own, no matter how small or insignificant it seems. I've also learned the hard way to not rely on a roll of electrical tape to solve real safety issues. That was definitely one of the most terrifying experiences of my life, and it's one I'll never live down. So, yeah, don't be like me. If something's broken, replace it. Don't try to fix it with tape, and definitely don't start a fire in your apartment. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.